two multiple choice questions in red, you can basically ignore because we didn't do cell organelles at all. Okay, so you don't need to worry about that. You can ignore the two multiple choice questions in red, but everything else you should be able to answer. Okay, so this is found under May 3 to 7 under practice test if you want to give that a shot as well. You could try that today in class. And then maybe bring the answers in tomorrow and we could discuss the answers tomorrow in class while we're doing the review as well. Okay? Okay, Emma T, are you available? I'll see you at the desk. Not this week, really, because if you think about it, Abby, tomorrow is the review for the test, and then Friday is the actual test. I mean, if you finish the test early, then sure, you can work on it then. Um, but I think you probably want to spend tomorrow actually reviewing with me and asking questions. Today we start metabolism. The problem is that we're already a week and a half, right? We're 2 weeks into the course. We're right on schedule, but there isn't a lot of time. I mean, there's only about 6.5, 5.5 weeks left of classes, and then you're out for the school term. What are we at? 1, 2, 3, 4 till the 2nd of June. 5, 6. Yeah, 6 weeks and 2 days, and you're done. You're done grade two. You're done high school for most of you in 6 weeks and 2 days.
Uh, when is our next test after this one?
It'll be about a week and a half after. So
Okay.
the first 3 units are the big units. They run a week and a half to 2 weeks. So I'm expecting the first 3 units to be done. So we're testing 1, Test two by the 28th or the 31st, I think. If I look at the calendar, I don't know where mid quad is. Mid quad, yeah, is the 19th. So just after mid quad. So probably the week of the 24th to the 28th will be your third test in genetics. And then it'll be a test a week, roughly, because the last two units are pretty quick. And in fact, oftentimes the last unit I usually don't do a test on homeostasis. I just do a big project that covers the entire unit. And I may do that for population dynamics. I haven't quite decided. So there may only be 3 tests in this quad. We're starting that today.
Okay.
Yeah, we're starting the
But
second.
yeah, just because I might have like something going on in like the next week and a half or 2 weeks. So this is why I'm just making sure when's the test exactly.
This thing that's going on. How long? How many days? Like, is it a day or two you're missing, or is it like a large chunk of time?
Well, it's only one day, and it's I think so far it's May 20th.
Okay. Well, if it's one day, it shouldn't be a big deal, and I can work around test dates for that if you let me know ahead of time.
Okay.
Okay. Next person I would like to see then would probably be Rosa. Protein channels are facilitated diffusion and active transport. Active transport, you're going against a gradient, and in facilitated diffusion, you're going with it. Okay? Callista, yeah, you can meet me. Just use, do you need the link? Okay, so I've got Farida and Rosa. So I'm going to set their accounts on right now. Okay. So I've got Farida and I've got Rosa. Anyone else? Just raise. It'll be faster this way. Just raise your hand if you want me to add you to the class right now, to the Tinkercad class. Okay, Karen. Karen. Krranehillon. And I'll show you how to add yourselves in a sec once I add everyone that wants one. Okay, Karen, you can put your arm down. Eviller. Okay, Kirsten, you can put your arm down. Okay, Rimka, you can put your arm down or hand down. Okay, next. You can put your hand down.
Did you say me?
No. ASMEH. Okay, Dua, you can put your hand down. Teja, you can put your hand down. Prisha, you can put yours down. Okay, Tyler, yours can come down. Ibrahim, you can put your hand down. And Cameron, you can put your hand down. Okay, now what? Added the students. Okay, I gotta give you your nicknames. Uh, okay. As I call out your name, look in the chat. Hey, Cameron, that's your nickname for the Tinkercad. And what I'm going to share is the class code. So if you use your nickname that I just gave you, Cameron, plus that code, you should be able to log into your account for Tinkercad. Okay? Test it out and let me know if it works. Ibrahim, your code.
You like? Can you just repeat what you said?
Yep. So your nickname for Tinkercad is in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Okay. A06636. And this number here is the code, course code for to get into the class.
Okay.
So when you go to tinkercad.com and join a class, you use your nickname and that course code number.
Okay.
Okay. Tyler, your code is in the chat. And use that's your nickname, and use the same code to log in. Teja, this is if you're using Tinkercad to do the model.
Wait, is mine the one that starts with TS?
No, TM, because you're Teja Moore.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So these are all based on first name, last name, then a 4-digit number. Dua, your DA 8953. Trisha is PB 5645. Karema, okay, I'll do it once I've given everyone else their thing. I'll set yours up. Rimka, there's yours. If you need the other class code, let me know. Kirsten, this is yours. I couldn't use your first last name because there's another KD in class. Curran. There's yours. Last one, RL2352. That's Rosa. And Farida is that. Okay. There's a course code to enter. Sure, Ibrahim, let me just set up Abby Palmer, and then I'll talk to you in the other room. Abby, there you go. That's your nickname for Tinkercad. And if you scroll up, you should see the code to join the class. Okay, I'm going to mute. Some of you have logged in. The rest of you still need to check it out, but that's fine. Okay, what I want to do then is start metabolic processes. So I'm going to close off the other section, the my desk, because I don't think you need that. Okay. Actually, it's 1:18 now. So we spent quite a bit of time with this feedback stuff. Why don't we take a 10-minute break right now, and then I'll start the new stuff. And those of you that want can play around with this Tinkercad and log in, etc., etc. Okay. So I will see you at 1:30. and we'll start talking about metabolism. I can't remember if I posted it for this class yet. I know I have for the other one. May 3/7, all students, metabolic processes, Unit 2, energy and metabolism post. Okay, it's up. It should be. Yeah, it's there. Just above the practice test. Okay, I'll see you at 1:30. Hydrogen and sucrose. That's actually that'd be Simport, but no, they don't both have to be. It usually probably would be. Like if you think of sodium potassium pumps in nerves, yes, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Question 2, practice test. The mechanism in which the end product of metabolic pathway inhibits an earlier step is known as. So that's A, feedback inhibition.
Yeah, but the answer bank at the bottom says B.
Answer bank, hang on.
Like, isn't there like at the very bottom?
Biology 12, I gotta find my original. Oh, that multiple choice answer key is for something else. Yeah, this I've changed the questions, so there's all the answers are for something else. Yes. You need to download it. Because it's a Word doc, Google is having issues previewing the whole thing. Probably because it's RTF format or something. Okay. So I'm going to start here. Metabolic processes, energy and metabolism, unit 2. Okay. So what's metabolism? I mean, we're not going to go too long because we've severely run out of time for this. But what is metabolism? Okay. So in biology, in biochemistry, it actually has a specific meaning. It's all of the chemical reactions that occur in an organism occurring in a step-by-step sequence. It's also called a metabolic pathway. Okay. Um, oversimplified view of that is this thing. Okay. This is a really simplified view of all the biochemical processes in your body. If you ever look up the term metabolic pathway, Rosh, so I'll put that in the chat. If you ever Google that, you'll get this massive online interactive poster, which basically has all the metabolic pathways that a single cell can do. And it's quite extensive, right? It's a really big poster, right? I mean, this is an infographic, really. I mean, I can't even see if you guys can see it because I can't see through the paper. But that's what a metabolic pathway, that's what these things basically look like. I got to get this thing laminated at some point. If you're ever curious, I would look up that particular term in Google. It's kind of neat. This is what I studied in my second year of university. It's basically the biochemistry unit that you get in second year, or the biochemistry course, and it takes 8 months to complete. But by the end of the 8 months, I could pretty much recreate that chart. Yeah, well, take a look up that Google that term. You'll see how big it really is. Okay, so metabolism consists of two chemical processes: catabolism and anabolism. We've already kind of discussed this previously. So catabolism is breaking things down, and anabolism is building things up, digestion and synthesis, right? So if you look at this energy, if you take carbon dioxide and water and turn it into sugar, that's anabolism. If you take those sugars and chain them into a polysaccharide, that's building again, synthesis, so that's anabolism. If you break that polysaccharide into oligosaccharides, a few molecules, a few polymers put together, digestion, catabolism. Breaking that down into single sugars, again, catabolism. And then breaking it down to CO2 and energy, again, catabolism. Why is that weird? It's weird that you have to take, for medicine and uh, dentistry, you have to take first year university physics. That's weird. If this was biochemistry, it kind of makes sense because there is biochemistry in dentistry, but there's very little physics in like the level of physics, kinematics and dynamics, maybe some dynamics. But do you understand what the purpose of all these prerequisite courses are? Sure, but do you understand the purpose of these prerequisite courses? Right? It's to get rid of people. That's the point. That's why you have first year physics for those courses. Okay, so why? Because when I don't know about what numbers are now, but when I went to UBC and thought about applying for medicine, they had 1,600 applicants a year for 400 positions. Right? So you got to get rid of people. So you go through those 1600 and go, okay, they don't have first year physics. They don't have first year inorganic chemistry. So we just take them out of the pile. They're in the no pile. Yeah, exactly. Every course does this. No, well, it was. In part, that had to do with the collective agreements, right? And the Teachers College actually did get rid of a lot, and they got rid of a lot by increasing the length of the course to 2 full years. Because when I went through, it took 8 months to become a teacher, 1 year, right? September to April. Now it's 2 full years. Technically, I guess. But remember, the universities are money-making systems. And remember how they deal with grade inflation, right? I mean, that's a topic for a huge discussion, right? Well, only if you're a citizen, right? I mean, if if you're a foreign student, it costs you a ton of money. Mm, I'm not 100. I know it is in. I know university's free. Up university first degree is free in Sweden. Oh, of course it is. Especially since public education doesn't fund as much, right? This is how schools, universities adjust for grade inflation, right? And this is why they have to be selective, right? Look at Waterloo. This was in 2018, so 3 years ago. 3 years ago at Waterloo, they had 13,000 applications for 1,600 spots in engineering. So yes, they have to adjust people. All right, let's get back. Oh, it's not just Waterloo though, right? Okay, so energy is the ability to do work. Now, what the heck does that mean? Okay, it literally means to be able to change or move matter against an opposing force. Okay, so examples of that are things like kinetic energy and potential energy. But in biology, what form is potential energy in? You don't run on gravity. Right. But what type of energy is that? Yeah, that's chemical energy. And it's the chemical energy that we find in a bond. So bond energy. Okay. So in a lab, we release it as heat, but in a living organism, That energy can be also released in the form of moving compounds across membranes, muscle contraction, or even light emission. So it doesn't have to be just heat, hence the term ender and exergonic. Okay, so the laws of thermodynamics play a role in this. So the thermodynamics is a study of the transfer and transformation of heat. Okay. The first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed from one type to another. So, for example, right now the sound energy in my voice is being changed to electrical energy by the microphone, sent as electrical energy uh, through the electromagnetic spectrum, right, to your speakers, where it's converted back to sound energy so you can hear it. Okay, or it can be transferred from one object to another. If you shove something, you've transferred energy from yourself to something else. Okay, so energy is never ever lost, and it cannot just suddenly appear, except maybe the Big Bang. And at the Big Bang, no one really knows how it works because no one understands the physics of the Big Bang. Our physics don't work at that time. So the first law of energy of thermodynamics is about energy transformation. And basically, it says that the energy before the transformation and the energy after the transformation are exactly the same, right? There is no net change in energy at any point. The second law of thermodynamics says that the universe tends towards disorder. What the heck does that mean? Okay, it is literally true. The universe is going towards more disorder. Okay, we say that it is increasing entropy. What that means is that energy transfer is not 100% efficient. Some energy is always transformed to something, to a form that cannot do work. So energy that cannot do work is what we call disorder, entropy, right? So if I have a rubber ball and I let it go at a certain height, when it bounces back, will it make it back up to the exact same height that I started from, or will it be at a lower height? It has to be lower, because some of the energy that was transferred to overcoming air resistance. Some of it became sound when it hit the table. Some of it became heat that got imparted into the table. Okay, so some of the energy got transferred to forms that can't do work. Work is moving that ball back up. Therefore, you can't get back up to the same high level. It bounces lower and lower and lower, and that's entropy. Okay. We see this in things like car engines. Let's say that a car has 72 kilowatts of power in its fuel. Car engines, internal combustion engines, ICE engines are about 20% efficient. So that means out of that 72 kilowatts, 57.8 of it roughly will become heat, thermal energy. 14 kilowatts will be available to drive the rest of the car. Out of that, to run the lights, alternator, and fan, 2.2 kilowatts will go to thermal energy, and the remaining 12 kilowatts will be used to run everything else. The transmission is 75% efficient, so 9 kilowatts will be available after that. And then the drive wheels and axles, each will use up the remainder to move the car forward. Okay? So thermodynamics basically says, second law basically says that in the end, all energy transfer ends up as heat. What does this imply for the universe then, ultimately? What ultimately has to happen to the entire universe? Okay, so the entire universe will basically come to a point where you've got absolutely no temperature gradients anywhere, right? So it's called, as Grant says, the heat death of the universe. Okay, and at that point, the entire universe will be at one temperature, which is minus 273 degrees Celsius, or absolute 0 Kelvin. At that temperature, there will be no energy left in the entire universe. Yeah, the entire universe is slowly heading that way. It'll take billions of years, right? Even me trillions probably, but it will eventually get there as pockets of energy slowly run out. And you won't have anyone to observe it because an observer. No, that's just it. There will be no energy. Because there will be no energy, the eventual temperature goes to absolute zero because all the energy will be the same. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, the Earth will be long gone.
Wait, but we have like stars and stuff right now, but and then
Right. But
during-
at some point, those stars will use up all their fuel, and they will supernova or explode or whatever. Eventually, I mean, the entire universe isn't old enough yet, but eventually there will be um, black dwarfs. Right? We have white dwarfs and red dwarfs right now, which are stars that are slowly dying. When those red dwarfs run out of fuel, they become black dwarfs. There'll be sun-sized objects in the sky that no longer burn. They'll be dark. They'll probably be just big core carbons.
then what form has energy taken at that point? Because
At that point, it'll be just be heat, and the heat will be at a temperature of 0 degrees Kelvin.
wait, but then where did the energy go?
It dissipated. It became so disordered, right, that it evened out. It came to an equilibrium at 0 degrees Kelvin. And at that point, all molecules stop moving. There's no energy anywhere.
But then wait, wait, what? So
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 the energy wasn't destroyed. It just dissipated so thin that it can no longer be used.
oh, so it's like very little bit higher than absolute zero?
No, it will be absolute zero.
But then where did the energy go?
It's there. It's there at absolute zero. Everything just basically stops. There is no storehouse of energy anywhere. The energy is equally spread out throughout the entire universe.
But if there's
The entire universe has, and from an energy point of view, has come to equilibrium.
but if the if
Think about osmosis. If you have an isotonic solution, right, the water's still there, but there's no more net movement. It's just that at the heat death of the universe, that movement doesn't even exist.
but isn't like if there's like a spot in the universe right now that has like no energy, wouldn't that be at absolute zero? So if all the heat dissipated, shouldn't that increase the heat by a little bit?
Right, at some point. But there is no place in the universe that's at absolute zero.
What? I'm so confused.
There's no place in the entire universe that is at absolute zero.
Is it higher?
It's higher than absolute zero.
Then how can how can it lose energy?
Because there is still an energy differential. There is still the ability to go lower.
But there's no point in the universe that's at absolute zero.
That's right.
So how is there a place
Because it means so long as a single atom is still vibrating, there's heat, there's temperature, and that means there's energy available. Once every single molecule stops moving, that's absolute zero.
Okay. I think I will Google this later.
Yeah. Okay. So really, is exactly, Kirsten. It's also why we're endergonic systems. We need to take energy in to stay alive because we're trying to stave off entropy. Right? What happens to the human body if there's no more energy supply coming in? It falls apart. This is always a fascinating topic to me. Okay, I'm going to do one more slide and we'll end it there. Okay, so how does this idea of thermodynamics relate to biology and metabolic processes? Well, in a lot of ways through this. Okay, so if you look, what do we call this diagram, the bit in blue? you would have learned this probably in grade 9. What is this trying to depict? These are trophic levels, correct? But the actual size of these blue bars. The chain is the animals in it, but what are the blue bars representing? The amount of energy. This is an energy pyramid. Okay? So ignoring the decomposers, look at the plants. Okay? Going to the herbivores. So that's demonstrating the first law, right? Energy is being transferred from one type of organism to another, and we do this through consumption. But the other thing that's neat is look at the size of this bar compared to the size of the herbivore bar. It's smaller. Okay. And because it's smaller, okay, this is indicating the second law of thermodynamics, which is that energy transfer isn't 100% efficient. Okay. So this idea of thermodynamics applies at the level of ecology. It also applies at the level of a cell, right? It's all basically about the same thing. Okay, now one thing I always to remember about these kinds of cycles or these systems, energy flows, okay, whereas nutrients cycle. Because after the top carnivore, what happens to the nutrients? What gets them? Not the plants. There have to be something before the plants. The decomposers down here, right? They're going to get these guys once they die, break them down, and the plants can use them up again, okay? And it cycles. Not true for energy. Energy comes in, used by the plants, passed on to the herbivores, passed on to carnivores, passed on to the top apex predator, and then it leaves the system. So energy cannot cycle. Okay, we're going to stop there because I'm at 1:55. I don't want to run too much over time and run into your asynchronous period. So come for tomorrow, we're going to do review. I will go through textbook questions. I will go through practice test questions. I will go over any slides. They do from some of the energy, but ultimately it escapes because it becomes forms that can't be used, right? I mean, if you look back, right, some of the energy, why is there this difference between plants and herbivores? Well, the energy that the plant used to grow, or the energy that the plant used to make seeds, cannot be used by the herbivore because the plant used it up, right? Any energy that the herbivore used to make its fur, well, the carnivore isn't going to be able to use the fur or the bones in this thing. So again, that energy is no longer available. So the energy escapes the system. The wolf can eat the meat of the muscles of the squirrel and like the brain tissue and get energy that way. But there's going to be stuff that it can't eat, right? That it just spits out or leaves behind as waste. Oh yeah, it's one. I keep getting the morning mixed up. Okay, I can keep going. Yeah, fair enough. That's true for that. I mean, remember that this is also, I mean, the closed system also includes the entropy that increases in the sun too, right? This is why our system works. This is why living organisms can live, because it seems like we break the laws of thermodynamics because we're making order out of disorder, right? You eat something and make it more ordered. But if you think about it, the amount of entropy that you had in the sun compared to the amount of disorder you get from a nuclear reaction, compared to the order you get from taking carbon dioxide and water and turning into glucose in a plant, the entropy increase in the sun is far, far greater than the entropy decrease you get in the plant. Okay? All right. I keep getting my mornings and afternoons mixed up, but you're right. We go to 220, so I'll keep going. Okay. Oh, I forgot to turn this into a laser. Sorry. Let's present. Wrong button. Laser. There we go. Okay, so the energy needs of life. Remember that organisms are endergonic systems. We need to have energy coming in. We need that energy for synthesis and building things. Okay, your bones, your muscles, growth, etc. Reproduction, movement, active transport, temperature regulation. Okay, all of these things are going to require energy. Doesn't matter what kind of organism you are, you need this stuff. So where do we get energy from? We've seen this before. Okay, so we get energy by energy coupling. We're going to use exergonic or catabolic reactions to fuel endergonic or anabolic reactions. So digestion is going to create energy. That energy will be used in synthesis right here. So we transfer the energy from one to the other to drive this synthetic reaction. Okay, so there's a living economy. Okay, we're going to fuel the body by eating high energy organic molecules, which we call food, right? Carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Okay, we then break those down, okay, releasing energy in catabolism. That energy then can be captured in a form that the cell can use. So we need an energy currency. Okay, we need some way of passing energy around inside a cell. Okay, we can't use sugar. It's too energetic. It has too much energy. We need something that has energy in smaller amounts. So what we really need is a short-term energy storage molecule. Okay, something like money. So money moves our economy. ATP moves is the currency for the energy economy of our cells. Okay.
ATP. We love it. You'll find ATP in so much of our science art, whether it's a GIF of a mitochondrion or cell transport, or a comic about cellular respiration or fermentation, you'll see ATP mentioned. So, why the big deal? Why is it all over the place? Many times, students will get it in their mind that it is an energy currency of some kind. When I first started studying biology, I noticed that in textbooks, it's often represented like this starburst thing or thunderbolt. And, I guess in my mind, I imagined it was like some big blast of energy that helped the cell do things. And by do things, I mean that we need ATP to do many cellular processes. Examples include active transport, such as when a cell is trying to move something against its concentration gradient, or its role in muscle contraction with the actin and myosin cross bridge. We need another video for that. ATP is critical for many types of cell signaling. You need your cells to be able to communicate. Those are all just some examples. But what is ATP? How do we get it? And how does it work? Those are the basics of what we're going to focus on in this short video. So what is ATP? If you remember the 4 major biomolecules, ATP would fit in with nucleic acids. Yes, like DNA and RNA. ATP is a nucleotide derivative, so it has those 3 parts you'd see in DNA or RNA nucleotides: phosphate, sugar, base. But it actually has 3 phosphates. ATP is short for its full name, adenosine triphosphate. This fancy name is helpful as it tells you that it contains the nitrogenous base known as adenine and 3 phosphates, hence the tri in adenosine triphosphate. Its sugar is ribose. How do you get ATP? All cells need ATP, and so they need processes that can be used to generate it. But the process can differ. It might involve oxygen, such as aerobic cellular respiration. It might not involve oxygen, such as anaerobic respiration or fermentation. During cellular respiration, plants break down the glucose they made from photosynthesis to make ATP. During cellular respiration, animals break down the glucose they consumed to make ATP. And it's not just plants and animals. Bacteria, fungi, protists, and archaea, They all need to make ATP. We have a video on cellular respiration and another one on fermentation that can be helpful to understand the process. But one thing that we do want to mention about making ATP is it's important to understand it is part of a cycle. With the ATP cycle, you have ATP, which can be hydrolyzed, releasing energy and losing one of its phosphates in this process. A process like cellular respiration can provide the energy needed to add a phosphate to ADP in order to regenerate ATP again, which is important as ATP can be used quickly. This brings us to how ATP is able to work. So how does ATP work? It's not just about ATP being hydrolyzed and releasing energy, it's more than that. Okay, honestly, it's more than our short video can go into, which is why we provide some further reading links, but let's look at some basics. So when ATP is hydrolyzed, meaning here it involves the addition of water, it's not really that the bond between the second and third phosphate itself is a super strong bond. It's actually more that the bond between the second and third phosphate contributes to this ATP being unstable. These phosphates with their negative charges don't like being arranged like this. The change from ATP, losing its third phosphate, to become the more stable ADP is an exergonic reaction and releases free energy. A popular example for understanding ATP is to use the spring illustration, like a wire spring. Consider how you might compress the spring. ATP would be modeled by that compressed spring, and then you would let it go until it just goes into this relaxed state, which would be represented by ADP. When ATP is hydrolyzed, if the energy was just released, it will likely not be useful for a cell if it's not actually coupled to something that needs it. Thankfully, the energy release can be coupled to endergonic processes that the cell needs to do. This can occur when the phosphate from the ATP is transferred to a molecule that is going to be acted upon. For example, this cell transport protein here is supposed to move some kind of molecule against its concentration gradient. Recall that if it was passive transport, these molecules would be moving from high to low concentration. But in active transport, thanks to ATP, this protein can move them against the gradient. When the phosphate is transferred to this protein, we say the protein has been phosphorylated. Sounds powerful. We can say in our example that this protein is more reactive and less stable in this form, this phosphorylated intermediate state. When it reverts into its original, more stable shape, it can assist in moving them the other direction. So, from marveling at the beating of a single cilia hair, or chromosomes being separated in cell division, or binding the correct amino acid on a tRNA, I could go on. We hope that little ATP symbol will mean something every time you see it. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
Energy storage? No. Energy use? Yes. Primary energy storage is actually glucose. Yeah. And the main reason has to do with the amount of energy. Okay. 1 molecule of, or 1 mole of glucose, yeah, has 2,831 kilojoules of energy per mole. 1 mole of ATP has 31 kilojoules of energy. So it's a much smaller packet of energy, therefore much easier to control the reaction. Okay, so ATP is adenosine triphosphate, okay, and is a modified nucleotide as discussed in that video. Okay, so it's a nucleotide, which is adenine, ribose, and a phosphate. Okay, so basically AMP, adenosine monophosphate. If you take that and add a phosphate, you get ADP. Add a third phosphate, and you get ATP. Adding phosphates is endergonic, right? Because look at all these negative oxygens, right? They don't want to be around each other. So they want to come off, which is why these are described as high energy bonds. So there's your AM. Is ADP to, yes, it would be. And in fact, we'll see that in the third unit when we start making DNA. Okay, so this is a nucleotide, but we can use it as an energy storage molecule as well. So build once and use in many ways. Okay, so how does ATP store energy? This graphic didn't quite work, so just ignore how many phosphates there are. Okay, each negative phosphate is more difficult to add. So a lot of energy is going to be stored in every bond. There's a significant amount of energy stored between the first and the second bond, and even more between the second and third, because you got such negative charges repulsing each other. Most of the energy is in that third phosphate. Okay, it's the one that's hardest to keep bonded because of the negative charges. Okay, bonding of the negative phosphates is unstable. Okay, so spring loaded is a good way to describe it, as they did in the video. That last phosphate, therefore, easily pops off and it releases energy. Okay, so this instability of the phosphates makes ATP a really good energy donor. Okay, how does ATP transfer energy? Okay, well, when we go from ATP to ADP, so that phosphate, last phosphate comes off, okay, that's going to release energy. Okay, specifically, it releases 31 kilojoules of energy per mole of ATP. Okay, that then can be used to fuel other reactions. Okay, so the way, remember that I said the way energy is transferred is when you make a bond. So when you break this bond, you don't actually release the energy. That doesn't make any actual physical sense. It takes energy to break it. But once you take that phosphate and attach it to something else, that will release the 31 kilojoules of energy, which can then be used to drive the reaction. And that's phosphorylation. Okay? That released phosphate will transfer to other molecules. That's the phosphorylation bit, and that's how you actually transfer the energy. Okay? The phosphate will then destabilize the other molecule. Okay? So the enzyme that transfers the phosphate is called a kinase enzyme. Okay? Phosphate, that third phosphate is kind of like the bad boyfriend that ATP wants to get rid of. Okay? Doesn't increase the energy level. What basically happens is when this thing goes to form a new bond, it'll release 31 kilojoules of energy. Okay? So, for example, it's in the next slide, actually. So, if we're building polymers from monomers, so if we take one monosaccharide and take a second monosaccharide, what I used to say was you just remove the water, right, using an enzyme, and you would bind the two together and make a disaccharide. Okay, and that's a synthesis reaction. Okay, the problem is, as a synthesis reaction, this requires 17.5 kilojoules of energy per mole of sugar that you're going to bind together. Okay, well, how are you going to get that energy? It's never quite this simple. Well, what we do is we combine it with an exergonic chemical reaction. Remember, this is endergonic. To run an endergonic chemical reaction, you at the same time run an exergonic one to drive it. So we're going to take ATP in this enzyme and we're going to attach it to this phosphate. Right? So we're transferring the phosphate from ATP to the sugar molecule. Right? So this becomes glucose phosphate. When we do that, that releases 31 kilojoules of energy to the system, right? So this required, because ATP transfers 31 kilojoules of energy whenever it's transferred, this causes 31 kilojoules of energy. This molecule is now unstable by 31 kilojoules of energy. We then bring in the second sugar, do the dehydration condensation, remove the phosphate, and when we do that, the removal of the phosphate and the attachment of that, removal of the hydrogen, the attachment of that, formation of that bond only requires 13.5 kilojoules of energy to be released. Why? Let's think about it. You start with ATP giving you 31 kilojoules of energy. Out of that 31 kilojoules of energy, 17.5 is going to be used to form that bond. That means you got 13.5 kilojoules of energy still left over. That's going to be released as heat, and therefore you use an exergonic chemical reaction to drive an endergonic chemical reaction. But it didn't really change the energy level of the newly separated phosphate. The phosphate simply transferred over and brought with it 31 kilojoules of energy into that bond. Make sense? Remember that these are all bond energies that we're talking about. Okay. What part? Right? This bond here has 31 kilojoules of energy. To form this bond here requires 17.5 kilojoules of energy. So when you remove this and replace it with this, you'll use up the energy that's available here. 17.5 of it will be used up. That means 13.5 kilojoules was left over to be released from the chemical reaction. And therefore, we turned an endergonic chemical reaction into an exergonic one. Okay? So you have to think of whenever I give these bond energy, these energies, these are bond energies. How much energy is in that bond? That's what you have to think about. Okay? And in fact, these are the first steps in cellular respiration. Okay? Remember, glucose is an incredibly stable molecule. If I've got a bottle of glucose sitting on my shelf out in the Nepean, is it going to spontaneously break down into carbon dioxide and water? No, it's a very, very stable molecule. So to get it to break down, and we've talked about covalent bonds being very, very stable. So in order to break it down, we got to make it unstable. We got to provide activation energy. Well, the very first two steps, and you don't need to remember the enzymes, okay? But the very two steps in cellular respiration is to destabilize that glucose molecule. We want this no longer to be stable so we can break it apart. So we use, oh, sorry, I got a phone call. Hello.
Hi, can I speak to Sumisha?
Speaking.
Hi, it's Debbie, the dietitian calling from the Kidney Center.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just calling to do the nutrition part of your appointment that you have next week.
Yeah, I can't right now. I'm teaching.
Okay, not a good time then, eh?
No.
Okay, what time do you want me to call you?
Anytime. So my lunch hour is from 11:30 to 12:30.
Okay, all right. Maybe I'll try tomorrow then, 11:30 to 12:30.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye bye. So the first two steps is to transfer phosphates from ATP to this glucose molecule, right? So that destabilizes, and you can tell we're transferring phosphates because the enzyme is a kinase, and kinase means enzyme, a phosphorylating enzyme, okay? So glucose becomes fructose 1,6-diphosphate. You don't need to know these chemical names. All you have to understand is we've added a phosphate to each end of the 6-carbon sugar molecule. Okay. This is going to make this molecule unstable. So unstable that it actually, no, this is the second unit. This is going to break apart into two molecules. Okay. and we'll talk about this then more probably on Monday. Okay, so with the ATP ADP cycle, okay, we cannot store ATP. Okay, it's a good energy donor, but it sucks at energy storage. Okay, it's too reactive. It transfers phosphates too easily, and it's only really good for short-term energy storage. Okay, so if you're going to store energy long-term, you're going to use carbs and you're going to use fats. Okay, so ATP, you're going to use it for cellular work, transfer it to ADP. To make ADP back to ATP, you need energy from catabolism. In other words, cellular respiration. This is why you need to eat. If you don't eat, this stops. If this stops, you can't transform this into ATP. And if you can't have ATP, you can't do this. Okay? Working muscles use or recycle, in other words, between ATP and ADP, they do this cycle 10 million ATPs every second. So it's an astounding amount of energy that you guys use. Okay, and that's it for today. We'll start talking about cellular respiration specifically on Monday. Tomorrow is review. So bring in your questions that you have. I will also be going over some specific ideas that I think you guys might have trouble with. None of what we covered today is on the test. Okay, you'll have the period to write the test. And I believe that's it. I'll stick around for a bit if you have questions. Otherwise, you're dismissed. And we'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye. Bye.
Hi.
Hi.
I actually have a question for the assignment.
Sure, Anne.
So like for question 2, if I don't want to build a model,
Mhm.
I just have to describe all the
Describe how your model works. Yeah.
okay. So like
I don't need you to explain how active transport works. I need you to describe how it works in your model, how you're demonstrating active transport.
okay, so like I still have to kind of like pick a model and then like for example like food or something and then I have
Right.
to show like okay, so this food describes this and that like that.
Right. Right.
All right, okay. All right, thank you.
Okay.
I have a quick question about ATP.
Sure.
So, because it requires energy to break the bond between the phosphate groups,
Right.
does anything happen to that one phosphate group that gets removed? Like,
Well, eventually it'll ends up sitting around in the cytoplasm
okay, so like,
because
does
it'll be transferred to something, and
mhm,
then that whatever the activity that needed to be powered gets powered, the phosphate
mhm,
comes off, and now it's floating around in the cytoplasm until it gets to the mitochondria, where it'll be reattached to a new ADP and become a new ATP molecule.
okay. So is that like a universal amount of energy? Like, I forgot the number. It was like 30. Is it
31 kilojoules.
31? Yeah.
It's
Is that
always
like it's
for
when
ATP to ADP. Yes,
okay.
it's a different value if both phosphates come off.
Okay. And if that phosphate goes in, um, like reattaches to something else, like after it's
right? It would require 31 kilojoules. It becomes an endergonic chemical reaction that requires 31 kilojoules of energy
to
to
the
reattach it.
okay, wait.
That's why you need sugar and cellular respiration, because cellular respiration provides the energy to reattach ADP and phosphate to become ATP.
Okay. I think I'm just getting myself confused with like bond energy and like endergonic and exergonic.
Well, bond energy, so bond energy is the amount of energy you need to form a bond,
Yeah.
or the amount of energy released when you break that bond.
Hmm.
Okay. If the energy is given off, then it's exergonic. If you need to put energy in, then it's endergonic. Both are related to bond energy. It depends on which way the chemical reaction is going. So, for example, ATP to ADP is exergonic because that last phosphate, it doesn't really need activation energy. It'll spontaneously break off on its own. It's a very unstable molecule, right? So that last phosphate wants to come off, and will come off without that much activation energy. On the other hand,
So
but it's still going to release, it still needs 31 kilojoules of energy once to form a new bond. But to break down sugar, no, you need a lot more energy. You need a lot more activation energy because the bonds are so stable, the molecule doesn't want to fall apart.
okay. So wait, does breaking the bond between the phosphate groups require energy then?
It would, but because it's so think about it this way. It's kind of like hydrogen peroxide. If you let
Okay.
hydrogen peroxide sit there in your on your shelf for a couple of years and go to
Yeah.
open it, it's just water and oxygen. It's broken down
Mhm.
on its own. It did not require any activation energy because the molecules bumping into each other provided enough activation energy for the hydrogen peroxide to break down into oxygen and water. So the reaction is spontaneous. ATP
Okay.
is kind of like that. It wants to
Okay.
go to ADP because ATP is unstable. That's why it's a horrible energy storage molecule.
Okay. And so then um okay, I'm sorry. I'm just confused. Because if it's a spontaneous reaction,
Mhm.
um like you said, it doesn't just like release energy into the universe, right? Like it like that energy
No,
is
it shouldn't. I
released when
mean, it would.
the phosphate bonds to whatever it's gonna